0 seconds. In AD 79, Vesuvius buried Pompeii and Herculaneum beneath meters of pumice and pyroclastic currents. Today, roughly 3 million people live in the same arc around the same volcano, in Ercolano, Torre del Greco, Portici, Castellammare di Stabia, and the eastern districts of Naples itself. What's beginning now is a VEI-6 caldera-forming eruption. The column will reach 30 to 35 kilometers. Pyroclastic currents will run more than 20 kilometers in the maximum sector. The wind is driving the fallout plume directly toward Naples. The red zone has been evacuating, but this eruption is already growing beyond what the red zone was designed to handle. 1 second later, the summit explodes. The central vent ruptures violently. A jet of fragmented magma, ash, volcanic gas, and shattered rock blasts from the crater at hypersonic speed. The upper cone fractures along pre-existing weaknesses. Blocks of the old summit, some the size of houses, are torn loose and hurled hundreds of meters outward. An expanding ash cloud engulfs the upper slopes in seconds, before it's even visible from the surrounding cities. The eruption column punches upward through the lower atmosphere at extraordinary speed, already kilometers high within the first few seconds. The eruption is no longer something people can evacuate after seeing it begin. Anyone still close to Vesuvius is already inside the disaster. Phones across Campania simultaneously light up with emergency alerts, and videos of the explosion, taken from tens of kilometers away, are already circulating before the second wave of alerts has finished going out. People in the evacuation centers who left hours or days ago watch the footage and understand they made the right decision. People still in the inner towns watch the same footage and understand the opposite. 10 seconds later, the upper slopes become a bombardment zone. Large volcanic bombs and lithic blocks rain around the summit and down the near flanks. The largest travels several kilometers from the vent before impact. Vehicles on near-summit roads are smashed or penetrated, roofs punched through by fragments moving fast enough to embed into asphalt. Rooftops closest to the cone are struck repeatedly. Incandescent fragments ignite dry vegetation across the upper slopes. Where they land on exposed combustible material in farm buildings and older wooden structures near the tree line, fires start before the ash cloud has even fully developed. Remaining police and monitoring teams inside the innermost exclusion zone abandon equipment hit by falling material and retreat downslope through whatever routes still exist. 1 minute later, the Vesuvian towns disappear into darkness. The eruption column climbs rapidly. Heavy pumice and lapilli begin falling over the dense urban belt beneath Vesuvius. Daylight collapses, not dims, collapses, as the ash cloud expands and thickens overhead. Ercolano, directly on Vesuvius's western flank and only 8 kilometers from the summit, is the first major urban district to go dark. Pumice accumulates at a rate that makes evacuation on foot almost immediately hazardous. Ground floors and vehicle rooftops are disappearing under material before most residents have processed what they're seeing. Torre del Greco takes an especially heavy pumice fall from its position directly downslope of the erupting vent. Power lines fail along the main coastal road. Electrical faults ignite scattered fires in buildings already being struck from above. Road surfaces vanish beneath rapidly accumulating material. Families still trapped in the inner towns move away from upper floors. Some have already given up on leaving. Pumice is past the door handles and nothing is moving on the roads. 5 minutes later, a 30-kilometer plume rises above Naples. The Plinian column continues climbing toward 30 to 35 kilometers. Volcanic lightning flickers through the ash cloud. The upper column bends west-northwest, directly toward Naples. Pumice begins falling heavily across the eastern metropolitan area. Capodichino Airport closes. Runways disappear beneath ash within minutes, rail equipment fouls. Electrical systems trip, engines ingest ash through air filters and stop. Drainage systems clog. The pumice layer grows deeper with every passing minute, and the column is still climbing. Hospitals start moving patients away from lightweight roofs and vulnerable upper floors. A surgeon in a Neapolitan hospital pauses mid-consultation, looks out the window at the wrong-colored sky, and tells his patient we need to move lower in the building. 15 minutes later, buildings begin collapsing under pumice. the tephra load across the inner Vesuvian belt becomes extreme. Large-span structures fail first, warehouse roofs bow inward and collapse. Supermarkets and industrial buildings fold beneath accumulating weight. Station canopies crack and fall. Weak residential roofs begin failing. Rain mixed into the ash makes the load heavier still. Streets around Vesuvius have become impassable. The pumice is too deep to walk through quickly, and every surface is also covered in fallen wires, roof fragments, and smashed vehicles. In eastern Naples, accumulation is lower but rising. Building managers stop worrying about procedure and start clearing people from large halls when they hear roof beams cracking. A group of emergency workers trying to hold one final evacuation corridor open withdraws when debris depth makes forward movement impossible. That is the moment organized rescue toward Vesuvius ends. 30 minutes later. The first major pyroclastic currents bury the Vesuvian belt. A large section of the eruption column collapses. Dense pyroclastic density currents surge down multiple sectors of the volcano simultaneously. Superheated mixtures of gas, ash, pumice, and rock moving at speeds that make the thermal catastrophe inseparable from the mechanical one. Ercolano, Portici, and the districts around them are engulfed. These currents don't slow around buildings. They flow into gaps, through windows and doors, around corners and between walls. Lower floors fill with hot deposits within minutes. Vehicles disappear. Streets cease to exist as streets. The urban fabric of the Vesuvian belt is being physically buried while it burns. Torre del Greco takes a direct current. Its lower streets fill with meters of material within minutes. Upper floors of stronger buildings protrude above the deposits, islands in a gray-hot landscape. Everything below them is gone. The smell of burning reaches communities several kilometers to the west before any visible sign of the flow does. A group of teenagers in a school gymnasium in Castellammare di Stabia watch the smoke on the horizon and don't say much to each other. 1 hour later, eastern Naples is overtaken. The eruption column collapses again. Repeated pyroclastic density current pulses travel over the earlier deposits, now elevated, reaching farther with each cycle. The eastern Naples districts of Ponticelli, Barra, and San Giovanni a Teduccio enter the direct pyroclastic density current corridor. These are dense populated urban districts. The currents enter streets between apartment blocks, fill lower floors, ignite anything combustible, and deposit meters of material before the next pulse arrives. Upper floors of reinforced concrete buildings survive in some places, the shells standing above buried streets. In others, the structural forces collapse them entirely. Fires spread through districts the currents have passed through. Gas lines rupture under the heat. Fuel from vehicles and storage spreads through debris. The fires burn inside a landscape simultaneously being smothered by ash. Residents watching from the western city see the eastern skyline disappear behind a brown-black mass. A paramedic stationed at a triage point on the western edge of the fallout zone has been waiting for patients that road conditions haven't allowed to arrive. 3 hours later. The column keeps collapsing, each pulse reaches farther west. The eruption produces and collapses its column in cycles. Each collapse generates a new pyroclastic density current pulse that travels over the deposits of the last. With each cycle, the flows run a little farther. Hot dilute surges, less dense than the main currents but still lethal, extend even farther, crossing streets and entering buildings beyond the main deposit margin. Central Naples is now inside the disaster. The Piazza Garibaldi district, surrounding Napoli Centrale station, takes surge and heavy fallout simultaneously. Structural damage accumulates. Fires spread through the district from multiple ignition points, some from gas leaks, some from overloaded electrical systems, some from incandescent material landing on ash-covered rooftops. Traffic stopped hours ago. The streets are not streets anymore. People sheltering in reinforced lower floors of apartment buildings have been there for hours, listening to the building above them being subjected to impact, heat, and ash loading at once. Some are keeping children calm by making up games. Rome is now receiving ash. Not enough for structural damage, but enough to close the autostrada to heavy vehicles and force Fiumicino into emergency operations. The Italian government is directing national resources toward Campania while managing what is simultaneously the largest domestic rescue operation in the country's modern history. 6 hours later. The caldera collapses. The magma reservoir has been draining since the eruption began. The crust above it can no longer remain supported. Ring faults rupture. The Gran Cono, the familiar shape of Vesuvius that has defined the Bay of Naples for centuries, begins subsiding. New vents open along the collapsing ring. Additional violent explosive pulses burst outward. The collapse generates seismic shaking that damages already weakened structures across the metropolitan area. Buildings that survived the ash and heat lose walls and floors to the shaking. Western Naples, Fuorigrata, Bagnoli, sections of Pozzuoli, is struck by hot surges that most pre-eruption models didn't project reaching this far. The eruption has grown beyond the red zone scenario. It has grown beyond most of the modeling. 9 hours later, part of Vesuvius collapses into the Gulf of Naples. The destabilized southeastern flank gives way. An enormous mass of volcanic material slides into the Gulf of Naples. The displaced water generates a tsunami. Against a coastline already devastated by hours of pyroclastic currents, ash, and fire, it doesn't need to be enormous to cause serious additional damage. The waterfront of Naples, already ash-covered and largely abandoned, takes the surge. Water drives through ground floor openings of buildings that had remained standing above street level. The harbor fills with floating wreckage. At the same time, Campi Flegrei begins responding to the seismic stress. Earthquake swarms intensify across the caldera. Gas emissions spike at Solfatara. In the maximum scenario, a localized phreatic explosion occurs somewhere within the caldera. The people who evacuated the Vesuvius red zone into the Pozzuoli area are now being told to move again. Some of them sit down and don't move immediately, not from refusal, but from a kind of exhausted disbelief that there is somewhere farther they're supposed to go. 1 day later, the main pyroclastic density current phase wanes. The infrastructure crisis begins. The column collapses are becoming less frequent. The worst of the direct pyroclastic destruction is over. What remains is a metropolitan region buried under meters of hot volcanic material, on fire in dozens of locations, without functioning water, sewage, power, communications, or transport. Rescue helicopters find it difficult to land in the areas most in need. Every surface is covered in hot or unstable volcanic material. Infrared cameras search collapsed buildings for survivors, but the thermal background from hot deposits makes the task far harder than in a normal structural collapse. A rescue dog handler at the edge of the exclusion zone is told the surface temperature ahead is still too high for the dog's paws. They wait. Medical facilities outside the disaster zone are receiving burn patients, respiratory cases, and crush injuries with almost no established treatment protocols for combined injury profiles. 3 days later, rain turns ash into lahars. The Mediterranean climate delivers rain. Across the mountain slopes and valley systems around Vesuvius, enormous quantities of loose ash pumice and pyroclastic material are remobilized. Lahars, thick volcanic mud flows, surge down every valley and drainage channel. They follow roads. They enter surviving communities that escape the direct pyroclastic current corridors. Towns like Nola and Acera, which escaped the worst of the pyroclastic phase, now face rapidly advancing mud flows. Roads passable yesterday are buried under meters of wet volcanic sediment today. Bridges collapse under debris load. River channels fill and overflow into fields and streets that were never in any hazard map. A family in a reinforced building south of Nola, who sheltered through the entire eruption without structural damage, opens their ground floor door on the 3rd day and finds mud flow has reached their street overnight. They had been preparing to leave in the morning. Now their exit route is under a meter of gray slurry. Agricultural land across wide sections of Campania is being buried or contaminated. The orchards and vineyards that define the region's economy are gone or inaccessible. Livestock that wasn't moved are dead. The farms that produced San Marzano tomatoes, Campanian wine, and buffalo mozzarella across the region are either buried, flooded with contaminated runoff, or simply unreachable. 1 week later, Naples cannot function. The eruption is declining. The disaster is not. Large sections of eastern Naples remain buried under pyroclastic density, current deposits, and lahar sediment. In the deepest burial zones, upper floors of apartment buildings protrude above what is now the ground. Western Naples has intact structures in places, but no functioning water, sewage, power, or food access. Campi Flegrei continues generating earthquake swarms. Every rainstorm sends fresh lahars down partially cleared routes. Emergency teams work through the western outskirts with bulldozers, clearing one priority route at a time. A woman in a shelter in Caserta has been asking the same question every day. When can I go home? Hotels across central and northern Italy have become long-term evacuation housing. Schools in Lazio and Puglia are receiving children from Neapolitan families who no longer know what they're returning to. 1 month later. Vesuvius and Naples are both permanently changed. The Gran Cono no longer has its old form. A broader collapse depression occupies the summit. New vents and fractures cut through the altered crater region. Steam and gas continue escaping. The silhouette that defined the Bay of Naples for 2,000 years is gone. The Vesuvian belt, Ercolano, Portici, Torre del Greco, exists beneath meters of pyroclastic deposits and lahar sediment. Only upper sections of buildings protrude above the new surface in the deepest burial zones. These areas are not being repaired. They are being mapped to determine whether reconstruction there is geometrically possible. Eastern Naples is the hardest hit surviving part of the city. Ponticelli, Barra, and San Giovanni a Teduccio suffered structural destruction, deep burial, and burning across entire districts. Central Naples has large roof collapse zones, ash burial, fire damage, and dead infrastructure. Western Naples has more intact structures, but enormous ash contamination, destroyed utilities, and continuing concern about Campi Flegrei. The death toll has climbed into the hundreds of thousands, accumulated through pyroclastic currents, roof collapses, fires, late evacuation failure, and lahars. Millions remain displaced. Every major rainstorm still generates lahars. Campanian agriculture is buried or abandoned across large areas. Campi Flegrei is being monitored around the clock while Italy simultaneously tries to rebuild around a volcano that has stopped erupting but hasn't stopped moving. The AD 79 eruption buried Pompeii and preserved it. This one buried Naples and left it burning.